So again, welcome to our webinar on diversity, steps for success. My name is Betty. I manage all of our Connect content and webinars, and I'm really excited to be hosting today's session. So first, I would like to bring out Adriele Parker. She's a DE&I strategist and career coach of her own company. So Adriele, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks Betty. Hi everyone, Adriele here. I am an independent diversity, equity, inclusion consultant, or as I like to think about it, thought partner based out of New York. And I really am passionate about helping, leaders, teams, and companies really improve and develop their cultural and structural competencies. So making sure that we're building really equitable workplaces where everyone feels included and as if they can bring their best selves to the workplace.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adriele. And next we have Anna Chalan. She's the Senior Director of Talent and DE&I at Frame.io.
Hello, well, thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm Anna, Senior Director of Talent, DE&I at Frame.io. I've been there for 3 years now. Frame.io is a Series C video collaboration software with about 200 employees, originally from France, and I moved to the US 9 years ago, and I've been in the tech space for about 6-7 years now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. And next we have Zach. He's the Vice President of Engineering at Seismic. Zach, would you like to share a bit about yourself to the attendees?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for coming. It's really great to see a large number of people signing up for something like this. But yeah, so I'm Zach. I'm a VP of Engineering at Seismic. I have about 20 years of experience in the technology industry, in engineering specifically, about 15 years of that in management. And I would say about 10 years of that really thinking about diversity and how to actually build teams and failing at building teams and diverse teams and learning from it along the way. So just, yeah, happy to be here and share my thoughts.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zach. And next, last but not least, we have Ursula Harris. She's the Director of Project Management at Consumer Reports. Hi, Ursula.
Hi, Betty. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be participating in this webinar. So as Betty mentioned, I am a Director of Project Management at Consumer Reports within the digital division. I lead a team that is responsible for the e-commerce and core platform product delivery, and that's reflected in our website. So the functionality that you see in our website, which we affectionately call CRO or Consumer Reports Online, is what our teams work very hard at keeping up, maintaining, building out the feature set on. As for myself, I've been in IT my entire career. I won't tell you how long that is. I won't admit to it right now. It's been a while. But I started out my career doing desktop support for the university that I attended. So I was like under our university union's wiring stuff. I moved into software engineering and development and leading software teams, and then eventually into project and program management, where all the power is. Just kidding. Yeah, so that's kind of the short and quick version of how I ended up where I am today. And I'm very happy to be participating again and looking forward to a lively discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us. As you saw in the beginning, we're going to be loosely focusing our conversation around 4 aspects of D&I. We're thinking auditing, culture, hiring, and reporting. This is an idea we actually borrowed from Anna, who uses the same framework to develop her own strategy. So actually just starting off with Anna, what does auditing a situation involve and why is this important?
Yes, I feel like a lot of people wonder where to start because it's overwhelming when you think of how do you tackle something as big as diversity and inclusion. And I think auditing is the first step and it doesn't take that much. So it's really about seeing what's your current employee demographic. I mean, you can look around, first of all, if you have no tools, right? But also if you do have tools, you can just turn on the EEOC capability so that you can start having self-reporting and just again, taking a pulse, what does your employee demographic look like? And then see how people are feeling. Sometimes people ask like, how do I know if it's an inclusive environment? Ask the people, like, how are people feeling? Are they happy? Do they feel included? Do they feel like they can bring their full self to work? So those are, I think, good questions. And then again, once you have the employee demographic, who is leaving the company, who is getting promoted, who is getting raises. Those are all really clear data point to see how you're doing. And then from that point, you can do a lot of work. But I think that's the first place to start to see where you should even focus on.
That's great. And Adriele, I guess following on from that, how would one begin with this? Say like a company didn't have any strategy in place yet, what are the first steps that you would begin with in doing this?
Yeah, sure. So if they don't have anything at all, so all that sort of data that Anna just mentioned, I think you have to start there, right? So I'm a huge fan of running surveys. So allowing people to self-ID. So we're not doing that kind of let me look around and see who's here, but actually asking people to provide information about their demographics, asking those questions about inclusion and belonging. Do you feel that you belong here? Do you feel that this is an inclusive workplace? How do you perceive leadership, right? Do you feel that leadership is bought in and actually walking the talk, as we say? So actually starting there, I'm a huge fan of doing group discussions or having like sort of focus groups or one-on-ones where you actually dig in. And it's a great way to bring people together who have similar backgrounds, who can really create a safe space and give you true feedback on what how your company is doing in terms of inclusion. So those are all great starting points. Is again, to Anna's point, is asking your employees, what's working, what's not, and what do we need to get to our sort of aspirational goal.
That's a great idea. And Lawrence actually is collaborating with myself on this webinar and organizing. He's popped on here. Lawrence, I was going to say, did you want to actually say a bit about yourself? Sorry to interrupt. And then, just explain to everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure, I'll keep this very short. I head up our back-end and data recruiting team over at GCS New York. Been recruiting in the tech space for just about 7 years now. I really find this sort of stuff super interesting, and I think it's as someone who gets involved with building teams from the outside, love to get more insight from everyone and maybe throw in some points from what we've heard from an outside perspective with candidates who are coming in. So might not add a huge amount, but hoping to certainly learn a lot from you all.
Amazing, thank you, Lawrence. And so just jumping back to what Adriele was saying with like listening to your employees and such, and kind of having that starting point. So I just wanted to ask Zach, with your own experience, either at your current role or your past experiences, what was your, I guess, sort of experience in starting these kind of strategies from scratch?
So just a funny thing, like I remember maybe like 15 years ago, I used to do a lot of college recruiting, campus recruiting for Bloomberg. And I was trying to get us involved in more like, diversity groups and like not just colleges, but like other groups where they would have career fairs and stuff. And so I was trying to pitch the LGBT community. I was like, we can go, we can do this thing. And they were like, well, who are you going to take with you? And we were scared to even ask the questions. Like, who is gay? Who would self-identify? And it was like left up to look around the room to see who looks gay or who do we know is gay or whatever, right? So it's just funny to also hear how in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, we've come very far. And sure, I was at like a bigger corporation in finance and maybe that had something to do with it, but it also feels like we're able to have a different discussion nowadays with that kind of thing. For me, it's about who you put in place of, it's about who you put in positions of leadership and whether or not they share your values. And this applies to diversity as well as anything else, right? So like when I look around my management table, I want to see a lot of different types of faces, and I want to see the organization that I want to see underneath them, right? So every layer has to actually apply the same thing. It's not enough to kind of, I think in engineering specifically, like we think a lot about, hiring the engineers that are diverse, or where do I find the engineers? But it's also about who do I put in charge of those engineers, because they're the ones whose ideas are going to, make their way through the organization. So, earlier this year, we all sat down as a team and we started talking about, what was happening with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and everything in the country. And half of the team was like, do we really have to talk about this? Like, we all know what's going on. And the other half of the team was just, I don't know, maybe scared to even engage in the topic, but it was important for us to have that conversation. So for me, it's just about who's at the table, like who do I actually put in charge of different things and who do I give opportunities to? and being willing to say the thing that needs to be said when it needs to be said. Even just asking the question, you don't have to have the right answer, but you have to be able to ask the question.
100%. No, I completely agree. And Ursula, did you have something to add as well?
I do. I was thinking about this question before our webinar, and I think, if a company does an audit of itself, it's like a very bold and brave thing to do, right? It's not for the weak at heart, because you're really doing some introspection, right? To really locate yourself as an organization, looking at what your core values are and deciding whether or not are those the right set of core values actually, or are we upholding them, and how we are bringing in employees to our company, how we are treating our employees, how they feel that they've been treated. Do they feel like they're included in all the places of decision making, or even if they can just show up as their authentic selves at work and be who they are and still have the same opportunities as everyone else. So I do think, doing an audit of a company, an organization, taking on that challenge to do that is, a very bold and brave thing to do. And actually you have to be comfortable with what you might get back out of the data. You might not be your diversity profile, or who you think you are might not be really who you are, right? So the data will show it. And so again, it's a brave thing to do. That's all I have to say on that.
Absolutely. And I guess a couple of things just kind of following off from that, what are some of the tools and resources that you would use to collect this kind of data? I know this was a question that I've gotten from some of our clients anyways. They're like, how do you actually go about collecting this kind of data? Is this something that's self-reported? Is it something that you would do yourself? And I'll open that up to the group actually, if anyone has any ideas on what resources you would use to collect this.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a bit some of the things we've done and also the struggles. And if anyone wants to add, and I still have some open questions because there's still some difficulties, especially when you're smaller. But usually most companies have tools in place already for HR systems, like an HRIS systems, or a PEO if you're smaller, like namely or JustWorks or Workday, so you should be able to just enable the EEOC capability so that anyone who starts at the company fills out a bunch of information and has to fill that out as well. And then they can always decide not to fill it out if they want to, but that's one. And then for the recruiting system, same thing. If you use Greenhouse or Lever or whatever, most tools allow you to turn it on so that people, when they fill out the application, they will have to also self-identify. So that's an easy way that hopefully should not be any additional cost, even because most companies have these tools already. It's really just a feature to turn on. So I would recommend doing that. There are some limitations. I know for us, it's been really hard to report outside of gender for the past 3 years because of the company size. And so it's to protect anonymity, and it's pretty complicated, and PEOs are usually not as good. So we created our own survey in Google form, anonymous, and we send it twice a year. Again, it's not great because it captures only a snapshot in time. So if someone leaves, someone starts, like you don't have that sort of live dashboard thing. But at least you can do that. So we sent one in August, we'll send one in January. And for that, we actually include gender identity, sexual orientation, all of the things that are not captured by the EEOC, which has some limitation again, because for example, it just says male, female, and other. So that's what we've done. I don't know if anyone has done anything else to remedy that.
I've taken on a similar approach, just using existing internal tools, and also a huge fan of using Google Forms, where you can, especially for smaller companies where you don't see that attrition happening as frequently as a larger company. Like, I think it's okay to have those kind of snapshots in time. And then just thinking about best practices for making sure that you're being as inclusive as possible. So to your point, like if we're doing gender, you could ask for, sex, but then you could also ask for gender identity, right? Which are different. Sex typically is your sex assigned from birth, whereas gender identity is how you identify how you feel now. And so you're able to capture that and any other sort of self-ID data that you want without any real restrictions on those fields.
That's great. And from a leadership perspective, sometimes I find some leaders might have time management challenges when it comes to these kind of things. Or like, how do I dedicate all this time or resources when, I have limited staff or employees, or they just don't know really where to start, or how much time is dedicated to finding this data out and coming up with these strategies. So what would you, I guess, suggest for those leaders who are worried about time management and resources, limited resources? Zach, I can direct this to you maybe. Do you have any experiences with this?
I think that's a cop-out answer. I'm sorry. Like, I think that's a way of saying that it's not important to me. Like, if I'm saying that, I'm basically saying it's not important to me, right? That's not an acceptable answer for a company that I want to work for instance. It has to, these kinds of things have to be led from the top, because they embody the organization, right? And so it doesn't mean that the CEO themselves has to spend every waking minute thinking about this. They can hire people to help them think through it and to own some of the challenges and things. But like, I just don't buy that as an answer. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sure there are real challenges. I don't want to like dismiss it outright, but I'm sure there are time management issues that have to come up with. But you get what you put into things. Like what you say matters, and what you do matters, and where you put your time matters. And so if a person is saying that, you really have to question whether they have the belief in, or whether they're just saying that they support and promote diversity initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the honesty. So that's exactly what we want in this conversation, and this is what we strive for. So, Ursula, what do you think about that?
I was going to say, I completely agree with Zach, right? So just like, you have your strategic goals for the year, this should be a strategic goal that's worked into your overall budget for your fiscal year. It's not something that's separate. It's not something that gets reduced resources. If it's important to you, then it should be prioritized in your business. Yeah.
100%. That's actually in line with something I read recently. It was actually during the middle of the pandemic, where some people were worried that a lot of DE&I strategies would be pushed to the bottom of the pile when it comes to priorities, because everyone's kind of worried about their bottom line and all of that. But they were saying that this is just as important as other aspects of the business.
Sorry, imagine if the same thing were said about healthcare benefits. Imagine if the same thing were said about your paycheck. I'm sorry, it's just too hard. Like, it's just so much time and effort that we have to put into paying you. Like, there are things that are third rails that are there for a reason, and it's our job to promote this topic to be another third rail that cannot be sacrificed and that kind of thing. I feel pretty strongly about it. I just can't believe that like that would actually happen, and I know that it does, but it bothers me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about budget again, like, really, like, seeing the things that we did when I started, we were 50 people. We used zero budget. Creating a D&I committee cost zero budget. Like, talking about it cost zero budget. Like, to me, it's just really like, do you care? Is it part of your personal values? And then just being thoughtful, right? Like, we'll talk more about this, but creating a diverse interview panel, zero budget. Like, all of these things is just a mindset and a thoughtfulness around how you approach things that doesn't cost time or money, in my opinion. Then you can do more, which will involve these things, which I think are worth it. But the baseline is really just being thoughtful and having these as part of your core values.
Absolutely. And
yeah.
We actually have our first question from the audience. This is an anonymous attendee. So they said, "Hi team, really helpful context on capturing diversity data. I'm looking at this from a global perspective, and I know certain countries have legal nuances about asking specific demographic questions. How did you go about this?" Yeah, I'll actually open this up to the group, really, if you have any experience with this, I guess.
I'll chime in. I think you have to really look at, it depends on which region you're looking at. If you're looking at EMEA, if you're looking at APAC, apologies for the noise. My dog is having a meltdown right now. Work from home life, right? But I think you really do have to look at the specific nuances and laws within each region to determine, and then from there set those questions. And that's when it really does help to partner with someone who has experience in the D&I space, because you may have to leverage that thought partnership to really understand. Because in some cases, for example, if we're talking about Asia, there are some countries where we have to protect people based on sexuality. And so we shouldn't ask questions about their sexuality in a survey because it can be dangerous for them. And so you really want to make sure that you have some expertise there to partner on those.
Agreed. I think it's just to chime in a little bit here. I think that was a question that I was about to raise, is the complications of actually reporting on this. And I think that's something which some companies, regardless of where they're based, have a level of nervousness about reporting and asking these questions. And I personally think that's one of the reasons when having a consultant come in who has much better knowledge on this is really beneficial. And it's something which I think needs to be more encouraged to these companies to take on consultants to give them the additional information if it's not what they already have. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up, but you've actually already answered the question I was going to answer. So thank you.
I also think too that regardless of whether if you bring in somebody, a consultant who really knows the field and the area and who can help you create the right strategy for your team, or if you decide to do it in-house, I really do think that you need to be very transparent with your employees. You can't try and do this and collect data, underneath the covers and then say, "Padow, like, guess what we're doing? And we're doing this initiative because we want to make things a lot easier and inclusive for you." and you didn't involve them from the very beginning. I think that sets the precedent of things like people not being very honest, not being open. And so it's really important to have communication from the very beginning, be very transparent about why the organization feels that it is very important to take on developing a DE&I strategy, what it wants to do, how it wants to improve itself so that everyone across the organization benefits. So I think communication, obviously there's some limits to it, like everyone has been mentioning, but communication to as much as you can is very important.
Absolutely. It's not just a box ticking exercise, which a lot of companies can do, but it's something to remember for sure. Just moving on to, the culture. I just wanted to ask, what are some specific examples that, any of you have used to actually build a more inclusive environment? This could be in the form of exercises or stuff that you've input into your strategies. This one I'll probably actually ask each of you, but just starting off with Adriele.
Yeah, sure. So I am a huge fan of doing team health assessments, or retrospectives, if you will, where you can actually come in and really understand how a team or organization is operating, how they're interacting with each other. So kind of thinking through, like, what should we start? What should we stop? What do we need to continue? And so that can, really take the form of going beyond just what we think of diversity and inclusion efforts, but really just fostering a really, truly inclusive, collaborative work environment. So huge fan of that. Huge fan of running or leveraging inclusive meeting techniques, right? So making sure that you're involving everyone as much as possible. A lot of times in our work environments, the extroverted or loudest voices in the room are heard the most. And so making sure that we're being mindful of that and giving people who may be quieter, more introspective, or need more time to reflect that opportunity to still contribute to discussions. So those are just some of the things that I like to do to really foster inclusive spaces.
Absolutely. And Anna, what do you think about that? Any
examples
you would suggest?
I agree with all of that. I think, again, we talked about that thoughtfulness. To me, it's just observing everything, just who's speaking at the all hands, who's getting public shout outs, who just everything. You should question everything and see, is there a broad representation for everything that we highlight specifically? Because those become like important models and signals for all of your employees, right? Who even in all hands often is like inspirational talks, right? Will mention this genius or leader, creative person, like who are those people who are being talked about too? Like all of these things really, really do matter because they send signals to the employees. I think unconscious bias training can be good too, as just a first step. Like we built ours in-house, which is like really interactive and kind of, we try and make it fun and try and have this little moment where you don't feel really great about yourself. For me, it means we're achieving something when you're like, oh shit, like I didn't, that wasn't great that my mind went there. But it also shows that we all have biases, and it helps, I think, demystify and remove the shame factor of it, which is just, okay, let's talk about it. Let's become more comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because that's a lot of what it is. We're learning, we're trying to get better, and recognizing that we're starting from a place where we have not everything figured out. We just don't. And so even you were talking, I think, Adriele, about reporting and showing publicly, like, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Like, I mean, even when I first started reporting, I think we had 22% women at the company or something. Like, it's not pleasant to stand up and show those numbers, but it creates that accountability and that sort of push to be like, okay, we have to be better. Now we can't just ignore it. At least it's there, because it's there regardless. So I might as well just own it and be like, this is where we're failing. This is where we have to do better. So I think that is important. And then the other things would be more like events. And I know lots of people are asking, like, now that we're remote, what can you do? We used to do lots of panels. We've been doing lots of like TED Talk watching, followed by a live conversation. And those I find are just really nice. We did one, I think, 2 weeks ago for Transgender Remembrance Day. We watched a TED Talk, and then we had a live conversation moderated by one of our employees. And again, it's just awareness raising, empathy building, and just that I think is low cost and very little time to do.
Absolutely. Do you have any examples of, I guess, exercises that you have practiced, like specific activities or that you've done around unconscious bias training? I think that's come up a lot in our previous webinars. And is this in the form of, I guess, sort of like a seminar, or would this be an exercise that you would do with the team?
We do it in group of like 15 to 20 max people, so that it can be more interactive. And it's a lot of like questions, like we'll show, you know, a slide that's sort of like a mind trick. It's just to show how your unconscious mind works, how you like make snap judgment on something and you're wrong, basically. So it's just having those little moments. And then we just, yeah, so it's just a lot of showing and then gamifying it by asking these questions to show how people get like trapped. Like we talked about confirmation bias, and we have an exercise that really people get so stuck, like they can't get out of what they already came up with as a theory, which is wrong. So that's the kind of exercise. I'm happy to share more over email or something, but there's a lot of exercise out there. You can see that just creates those little like just realization that sometimes are not even related to diversity, is just to show how your mind works at making snap judgments that are wrong. And we basically, it applies to people. We do that based on how we were raised, the society we were born in, and again, it just shows like we are all biased unless we somehow got removed from any, you know, it's like it's just not possible. We might have different biases based on the society that we were born in, the culture, all of that might create slightly different biases, but we still all have some.
Awesome. And Ursula,
sorry to dive in, Betty. One of the things that we've been seeing a lot recently is companies requesting blind resumes where there's no name, certainly no photographs, and I think that's something which is taking away some of the unconscious bias that people have. But that's certainly not being adopted widely. It's coming in a bit more, but I'd say the vast majority still, whilst they wouldn't want photographs with a resume, are still very happy to have names because of tracking applications and things like that. So I think that's an area which is very hard to get around. So I was wondering, internally, when you get a resume with a name on, is it something where you would remove that name to send on, or do you keep things very specific, or how would you deal with that? I guess to the wider group.
I can chime in. I've done blind resumes before, and it is a technique that's proven extremely useful. A lot of that research we have is based around orchestra studies. So back in the day, there were very few women in orchestras globally. And so one of the techniques that they used was to drop a curtain in front of the stage so that those assessing, those auditioning couldn't actually see them, right? They even added a carpet to the floor so women walking in with heels couldn't be heard, and you couldn't bias against gender, right? Because there's this idea that like women didn't have dexterous fingers, so they couldn't play strings, or didn't have the lung capacity to play a wind instrument, right? And with that blind auditioning, we then saw an increase in women in orchestras globally. But we've also seen, I can't remember which orchestra, I want to say it's in Europe, they never implemented that blind auditioning and they're still struggling with that gender balance, right? And so blind auditions, much like blind resumes, can help. But to Anna's point, that still doesn't check your own individual bias, right? We're just making you blind to that bias and you're not actually learning on your own. So there are pros and cons, right? I think to leveraging it, but I think you need to kind of tag team both where you're helping people run those self-assessments and say, hey, I have this bias. And then actually like, why do I feel this way? How can I change it, right? And so I don't have to remove a name or a picture for you to fairly assess a candidate. You just get in the habit of naturally doing it.
Just to jump in, but I totally agree with what you just said. And I feel like it can be a remedy for the short term because yes, it is proven efficient, but it shouldn't be a replacement of the work that people still have to do. And also you will meet the candidates later on in the process. So, you know, if you're not working on it, you're just delaying the problem. So I think it can be done in conjunction, but it shouldn't be a replacement of the work that still needs to happen.
Well, I think it's also like privileging people who are better at writing resumes. Like resumes, you know, in the orchestra example, it's really interesting because the sound is the job. It is the thing you are applying for can actually be evaluated in a blind way. You know what I mean? It is literally using a different sense. But you know, like for engineering, for instance, I have a huge list of skills that I actually need somebody to have. And some of them are teamwork and communication and collaboration, and they're not isolated, you know, and I actually want to see, I work with a lot of people who have terrible resumes. And if the resume was the only thing, if that was their entrance into my hiring pool, then it might not necessarily be the way. So I kind of like what you were saying at the beginning, which is you need to recognize this whole person from the beginning. Like you need to like understand that this is a person and you need to get to know them and all the strengths and weaknesses that they're going to bring to your organization. Yeah.
Lawrence probably has the luck of, again, working with a lot of candidates before seeing their CV and speaking to them, seeing their LinkedIn profile beforehand. So Lawrence, I'm sure you've seen your share of bad CVs, but fantastic candidates for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the majority that you speak to who then send you to a resume, which is almost impossible to read, it is pretty high. And I think it's very hard to take away that bias and then help someone with their application. And obviously that's one of the things that we do is help people to make sure that what they're sending across is not going to get them removed from a process just purely based down to a simple problem on a resume. So really interesting sort of point.
And there's so many rules that depends also on the like really privilege based also on how much coaching you got on building the resume and also knowing the culture, like expectation of resumes, which is really different. Like when I moved here, my resume had my picture, my name, my age. Like that's what we do in France, which is really frowned upon here, which I didn't know. And really I was getting no callback. It was really a struggle until one of my American friends saw my resume and was like, oh my God, you need to remove this. This is not appropriate. But it's like, but how would I know this? Like there's literally no way for me to know. And it seems, again, a bit like superficial, be like, so now I'm the same person applying, removing my picture and my age, and now I'm getting people calling. It just seems really flawed system. So I feel like if we can train people to just really look for what matters and try and not think too much about superficial criteria for resumes.
That's funny. I actually had the reverse experience going from Canada to Ireland. I was like, well, everyone has like their photos on here, their age and stuff. I was like, I shouldn't be looking at this. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. It's definitely a cultural thing for sure. And again, just before we move on to our next aspect, Ursula, do you want to share any, ideas around building an inclusive environment, whether that be, again, activities or stuff that you've experienced in DE&I strategies? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my point of view is really coming from that of a functional manager. And I think as a functional manager, you have to be super self-aware, managing people. And so to the point of, I think, Anna and Adriele mentioned, you have to be looking all the time and looking at who's participating, who's providing feedback and things like that. But for me, I know I just started working at CR 8 months ago. It was my 8th month anniversary yesterday. I came onto a team that was already established. They're great. They're awesome. They're amazing people. I can't say better things about them because they do their jobs and they do it well. However, the things that I personally was noticing was like, okay, this person has been here for quite a bit of time. I don't see them in any other arena outside of their own team. That's got to change because I need the rest of the organization to see how awesome these people are. And so it has been my mission as their manager, because I'm interested in growing them as professionals, not just in where my own personal career goes, because actually that's probably the least amount of my concern right now. It's really all about them. I want them to be in front of executive leadership. I want them to be in front of their other peers, demonstrating how amazing they are, the work that they're doing. It should not just be siloed into one specific aspect of our organization. And the other thing too is, I think it's really important to allow people to express and represent their own ideas. As leaders, sometimes we'll spend time with, the people on our teams. They'll say something amazing and great. Then, not on purpose, but sometimes that becomes like, oh yeah, that was, somehow that becomes your thing, right? And so then you're talking to other people in the organization where it really came from somebody on your team. So allowing them the platform and the opportunity to express that, because it is very demoralizing and very marginalizing. So, and I'm sure everyone has had this experience where you say something and you're like, man, that was great. It's still like literally hanging in the air. And then in 2 minutes, you turn around and somebody else has said the same exact thing. And you're like, I just said that, so you really want to make sure that as a leader, you recognize that. And you can even say, so-and-so just said that. Actually, would you like to express or go further in what you were talking about? Like just making sure that that person feels included and supported. Those have to go hand in hand.
100%. I was going to say, do you think a lot of leaders pay enough attention to that sometimes? I think sometimes leaders might take like sort of, a back seat to these kind of things when it comes to, team dynamics. Is some people might not see this as something that you can control, but as a leader, do you feel that is something that you can control if you just kind of pay attention? Zach, what do you think about that?
I was thinking about this earlier. I think Ursula is right. Like, you have to call people out. Like, you don't have to do it in a mean way. You don't have to do it in the moment necessarily. You don't. There's a right time and a right place sometimes. Sometimes the meeting when it just happened is the right time because there's some trust within the team. It's an okay place to do that. You're not going to demoralize or humiliate the person. But at the same time, like, everybody needs to. There's an advantage to doing it in those types of scenarios where everybody gets to see what's important to the manager and how the manager actually applies justice. That's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. I think the way I try to work with my managers is asking them questions about whether they're treating the people on their team differently. I have one manager who has one female engineer in his team. She also is the junior engineer member of the team. And so sometimes it's hard for him to separate, like, is he treating her differently because of her juniorness, or is he treating her differently because she's a female? And so I have to actually ask him that question, and we have to engage in that debate. And we have to make sure that that's not what's happening, that he's doing the right thing for the right reason, right? And so, it's important that, like, you don't want to treat everybody equally. Everybody is not equal. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And like, you need to, as a manager, you need to actually play to people's strengths, help them build up the things that they're not good at. But like, you need to understand why you're doing it, and you need to have somebody else who's going to check you. So I really like the idea of being able to call other people out. Again, you can do it in the right way, but I think it's important to say the truth, say the thing that happened, name it, and talk about it. And then the only other thing I was thinking about here, which is like deliberate team formation and assignment delivery. So like, you know, I try to do things where we rotate assignments through people on teams, just to give people a chance, like to shine when you might not otherwise think that they could shine in that way, right? Like just to like again, what Ursula was talking about like letting these people shine in a new context outside of their team, that kind of thing is super important. So giving everybody a chance, and like, yeah, it's okay if everybody doesn't shine, but everybody needs to have that chance to shine. And so I think like deliberate assignments for individuals to help them grow is a super important way to promote diversity and to promote diverse people having different roles within your team or your company. And also just like making sure that when you create a team that you're actually thinking about like that team as a unit and what does it actually comprise and who's on it. And you don't always get those choices, and sometimes things are handed to you and whatever, but you can have in your head an ideal place where you want to take that team, and you can be moving towards it every step. Those are the other things that I was thinking about.
Awesome. And we actually had a few questions come through the chat, I just noticed. I'll just start off with one from Ralph, actually. So he said it was a great comment from Zach on the need to engage with the candidate on their strengths and weaknesses, which is kind of exactly what you were just saying, Zach, but particularly when assessing various skill sets for a specific role, what are some of the techniques to diffuse biases? So we kind of already talked about, you know, blind CVs, but we don't think that actually diffuses biases. It just sort of blinds you to your own biases. But what are some techniques to diffuse biases when it comes to, I guess, hiring for specific skill sets? Anna?
One thing that I found to be effective is you can't do that for every role, but as much as possible, have a short assignment as the first step before the recruiter phone screen. And I know not everyone agrees with it, but what I found effective is that it allows you to not put too much weight into the resume and actually give them something to do right away. And so we do that, for example, for our BDR team, which is extremely diverse. And there are resumes that maybe you would see and you would not think, oh, I'm going to commit to a 30-minute phone screen because it's a big time commitment. But if you're like, oh, this person is worth a shot, which is pretty low commitment. Again, you send all of them a really short assignment. So I'm picking that example, but they have to record a voicemail and write a mock-up like email to a prospect, and that's it. It takes 10 minutes. And we're reviewing that almost in place of the resume. And then we decide to phone screen or not. And I feel like that changes a lot how we consider candidates from the get-go, because it's already more skill-based and work output versus resume. So that would be one thing I found effective as much as possible for roles, is quick assignment or ways for them to showcase their skills instead of putting it all on the resume to decide to commit to 30-minute phone screens, which makes it harder to consider many people.
Absolutely. And Lawrence, I was wondering, as the first touch point in a lot of cases when it comes to candidates before they meet the client or send their CV, and I guess are there any kind of tips that you would suggest in terms of when you're resourcing for a particular role?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always a really interesting one. The sort of challenge before jumping on any sort of call. What we've discovered over the last sort of few years of this becoming more and more popular is the number of candidates dropping out at that stage just because there's another company that jumps on the phone with them straight away and they don't consider it a test before speaking to someone. We found that having someone on the inside who gets on a call and gives them a little bit more about the company keeps the buy-in from everyone, which it's sort of a catch-22. Like, you can lose out on candidates because they're not going to do the tech test, but equally you might not speak to the people who would do very well on this tech test, or any form of test. I use tech tests because I'm mainly recruiting tech, but that sort of thing, it tends to become problematic. However, that's purely from a software engineering side. It may be very different within different sectors. So that's the one thing I'd say there. From sort of speaking to people in an initial way, we obviously, as recruiters, will speak to everyone as much as possible, providing that they're meeting the base requirements for what's needed. And then we will try and get a lot more information to then provide forward, which again is a useful way, But for someone inside a company, you can understand how it's not as appealing to spend that much time speaking to various people that may not move forward, because if they're not right, then you don't want to spend a large amount of time on. So it's very hard to find an ideal solution for this, which is what I think is why these discussions are so interesting.
Absolutely. And, on the subject of hiring, if a company is really struggling to get that diverse talent pool just in the very beginning of their hiring process, I guess, do any of you have any ideas that you would suggest to them to really open up that pool to get a little bit more diversity in their applicants?
I think you need to first understand historically, how have you sourced talent, right? And understand, is your existing network or how you've been sourcing, is it narrow, right? And then helping to really de-bias the process by creating a truly structured hiring process is super important. So like all of your hiring stakeholders have to be aligned on what the criteria is for that particular role. And everyone has to agree on it, because that's the number one way to sort of de-bias yourselves and not focus so much on someone's personality, but rather here are the skills that we need this person to bring to the table. Also making sure that you are creating a fair process. Everyone's going through the same process, right? You're asking the same questions of candidates, or at least you create sort of a pool of questions for people to select from, right? So that it's fair. Implementing a rubric is helpful, right? Where we have a score and I say, I gave you this score on this competency, and then all the interviewers come together to talk about it, right? So that we understand why people are coming to these decisions. But that structured process and really looking at historically how you sourced and brought in candidates is important, because it could be that you're hiring very homogenous, folks because your networks are homogenous and you're looking at referrals, right? You may need to build a connection and reach out to other networks that can bring you more diverse talent pools.
Mm-hmm. And as a hiring manager, I was going to say, what I guess have been your experiences, Ursula, during this process where you might find that you've lost candidates during the process, or some mistakes that you might have had in your current or previous processes when it comes to hiring more diverse talent.
I think, one of the issues that I've had to deal with in the past is not so much we've in some of my past experiences have had definitely diversity within the interview panel, but we lost candidates because of the people who were actually reaching out to them and starting the conversations in the beginning. And so when people don't see themselves reflected and being approached by people who are like them, and it can shrink the pool of candidates that come in. Definitely have had that experience before. To the point of bringing panels together, setting up rubrics and things like that, I have noticed, over probably the past 5 years that the organizations that I've worked for have moved towards that, to take some of the bias out of candidate selection, to try and remove some of the personality and things like that, even though you want somebody who's going to fit, be a great fit for your organization, but you have to, there's a balance, right? And so hopefully some of the kind of the skills and things like that you weigh, but then you also at some point you've got to take into account whether or not somebody's going to be a fit.
Absolutely, and that actually kind of brings us to another common question that occurs in our previous webinars is, how do you bring more diversity on at a leadership level? Zach, what do you think about this?
Promote people or diverse. I don't know. It's pretty simple. It's about mentorship, and so I'm a big fan of promotion generally. I think it's a great way to keep people. I think it's a great way to keep people engaged with your company. I think it's a great way to plan for an employee's growth. And I think, identifying which, not everybody's a manager, especially in engineering. There are very much like two different tracks, and people can kind of choose which one they want to go down. But identifying early on, who has management, leadership potential, and then mentoring them and giving them chances and giving them feedback and actually helping them do it. We promoted, I rarely hire managers. It's really, really hard, because the blast radius from hiring a bad manager is so much worse than hiring a bad engineer, right? And I can only speak about engineering, but like, I know sometimes you do have to hire managers, and I will be looking for a job at some point, so I hope somebody hires me. But but the point is like, I first look inward. I first look there. I see like, how can I promote the right types of people that I want to be in leadership positions or who deserve those leadership positions, and can I put them there first? If I can't, then I have to go outside. And I mean, the thing that, so I did one of these, I listened to one of these panel discussions about diversity in the summer. And there was a guy, Aubrey Brown at Airtable, and he was great. And he was talking about, I totally fell in love with this thing that he was talking about, which was, you hire for the long term. You don't hire for the short term. You hire hoping that you're going to have that person with your organization for 3 plus 5, 10 years. Why do you want to rush? Why do you want to rush and hire the wrong, or hire a person so quickly that you're blind to looking at the makeup of your organization, right? You really do need to take your time with that. And if it means that a project that you have is going to be a little bit later, like, so be it. If it's important to the company, then this is the thing that you have to take into account. So I don't know. I mean, there is a problem of the people who have been in leadership positions are there because of the fact that there were not other people in leadership positions, and so there is a bias towards like, the people who have been leaders will continue to be leaders, and that's something we have to overcome. I think we overcome that through promotion and time. But I think, just spending the right time, like, just because, like, I think it's important to find people that share your values more than it is important to find somebody who has the exact right skill fit, the exact right experience, the exact right, all those things, because nobody's going to come into a place as a leader and know everything that they need to do. They're going to learn a bunch of things on the ground. And so finding somebody who you can align with, who you can build trust with, who you believe will help you take the organization to the place you need to take it to, I just think that's so much more important. And I think you can do that, and diversity like fits into that list of criteria. I also just want to double click on the rubric and the structured interview. This is the only way to hire people. Like, this is the only good way to hire people in a non-biased way, in an unbiased way. Since we've moved to that, like a few years ago, I would say, it's just, I will never go back. That is absolutely the way to do it.
Absolutely. I think you described it so well. And that actually reminds me of a previous conversation I had with Anna individually about allyship, and how you're saying.
I was going to bring that up.
Okay, perfect.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that especially with leadership, like, I feel like hiring for diversity is key. To be clear, this is key. This is what we should be working toward. But I find that sometimes it's a bit all or nothing, that companies will work really hard to try and fill especially leadership role with diversity, and then when it's not working, let's just hire anyone else. But I think hiring great allies is key, and to build a diverse leadership team will take some great allies on that team also. And so I think that's really important. And so what we've done now is, for any senior director and above, I lead a 30-minute interview dedicated to diversity and inclusion and management philosophy. And I found it so critical. And there are people that I had to say no to, that in terms of skills for a really senior position, that are hard to fill too. Got yeses in every other interview. But I'm like, this person is not a good ally. They will not further the mission in helping us build a diverse team. And a really good example I have was our COO search. And we had only one C-level person, was our CEO. We did try and find diversity in the COO search, and interviewed a lot of different people. Met one person who did not come from any underrepresented background. And throughout my interview with him, I asked him so many questions, and his passion for diversity was huge, like huge. And he came in, and since he came in, we've hired 2 more C-level, both women. Now the C-level team is 50-50. And like, this has been, just working with him has just showed me, reconfirm what I knew, but how important allyship is, especially at the senior level. So again, it doesn't replace it, but I feel like sometimes it's being just forgotten a little bit as oh wait, we couldn't find someone from an underrepresented group. And I think that would be a mistake.
Exactly. That's great. And I'm just conscious we're running out of time a little bit. So I just want to really, oh, sorry, Ursula, if you want to add any last thing on that.
I just wanted to say real quickly that in hiring, looking for diverse leadership, companies need to make sure that it's not seen as reactionary, but it's done very intentionally. And so it's not like, oh, we're going to, bring this person in of color or, different gender or whatever, bring them in, and then they're like completely not positioned to succeed whatsoever. They don't have the executive leadership support. They're not able to do their job in a very autonomous type of way. And it's like, you're set up to fail. And it's like, look, we tried that, doesn't work, so you have to be very careful about what your intentions are about specifically looking for someone that may be different to fill a role, because nobody wants to come in and be seen as a diversity hire. Nobody does. Nobody.
That's actually a really interesting point, Ursula. We frequently get asked by startups that are still very much in their earlier stages, in their growth point, who don't have any female or people of color in their sort of current employment, and they say, well, we need to change this. It's like, yeah, absolutely. And then the question becomes, how would you go about making that pivot at that point where they've already gone down a path which has created a problem for improving their diversity because there just isn't any within their current team? Anyone have a good answer of how you would sort of change something once it's that far along?
I think first is, again, auditing the culture and trying to see, having really uncomfortable, probably conversation at that point of why did we get to that place to begin with? Because really when it's that much usually, and there's no diversity at like 100 people, something is going on. So I think it's just, again, having an open conversation with each other to be like, what's going on? What are we doing wrong? Taking a pulse from, hopefully there are some people who are from different groups. So just trying to take a pulse. How is the culture? Do you feel included? All of that. And then making changes, and just jumping in on this because I often have the question like, how do you make sure you don't lower the bar? And which I find very triggering, because the thing is we wouldn't, because we're running, the idea is just to broaden the pool of candidates in order to consider more people, to hire better people. So it's like, not only you don't lower the bar, you actually raise the bar because you consider a broader group of people. And then as long as you keep that very structured interview that we were talking about, people also won't feel like they're diversity hire because they've just gone through that process. They know it was a legit process that was hopefully even challenging in some ways, and they will feel like they deserve that position because they were the best. And I think that should be really, really clear, hopefully to the person who was hired and to everyone involved in the process, because they saw how structured it was. And the person hopefully then will prove that they were actually really skilled. So I think that can be avoided by making the process very structured. And yeah.
That's an awesome answer, Anna. I certainly, we've been working with people who are coming in from a candidate side who say, well, what's the diversity like within this company? And the amount of times that there is no good answer from the company to be able to turn around and tell you, because they've not done the auditing, they've not actually looked into where they're at the moment. And this really is the most important place to start from, is just having a response and knowing where you're at. I suppose with my question, it was more if I want to gear around engineering, because fairly frequently, and I think this is the case for the vast majority of companies, their engineering and technical teams have some of the lowest diversity out of other areas of the teams, and that's an area which hopefully we're going to see a lot of change in soon. But it seems like that's something which is still lagging behind other parts of businesses which have improved their diversity. And Zach, I saw you unmute yourself, so please feel free to step in.
Just assumed you were addressing that to me. No, look, I think there's an economic issue here. The supply and demand is so out of whack for engineers, especially in the United States, that it allows companies and individuals to behave irresponsibly. and the amount of money that goes between companies and employees in engineering allows and furthers the irresponsible behavior of both sides of this coin. And it's only people that actually care about this and are reminded to care about this that do something about it, right? It is possible to ignore this topic completely and to go about your business and to suffer, you know, if you're a consumer brand, maybe not, because you have sort of the world kind of watching you and calling you out on Twitter or whatever. But like, if you're a B2B, you make network routers or whatever, like it's entirely possible that you don't have to care about this and your business will be fine, everything will be fine. That is not necessarily the truth. Like when you were talking, when Anna was talking about the test that you give to people, I used to be able to do that at Bloomberg because the people that were banging down the door to come in to work at Bloomberg was higher than the threshold needed to take the test. When I tried to do the same test at the company that Anna and I used to work at, Percolate, had 200 people, everybody refused to take it because they're like, whatever, I got a million other places I can go. I don't have to take this test. So they don't have to play by the rules. They don't have to play by the rules you set up. So if a company that was smallish and wanted to know what they could do about this, I would remind them that it's never too late to do the right thing. Basically, this is something you have to take on as something that you believe in. There's nobody that's going to tell you that, like, the market is not going to tell you that this is like what's necessary or needed. It's got to come from some other place. And I think everything we've talked about here so far applies to those companies just as it applies to IBM, just as it applies to Amazon, just as it applies to every company.
Absolutely.
And just to say one thing of reporting, so we've kind of touched on it actually with our auditing process and such, but I know diversity is a little bit easier to report on. I guess it's a little bit more clearly, you're clearly able to kind of report on diversity a little bit more than inclusion. So I was going to say, how would you suggest, I guess, companies measure their how inclusive their environment is, and what would you suggest to companies trying to improve their inclusive environment? Are there KPIs that you can set or targets? Is that even possible?
I think you can set, we set target for a culture survey. We have a whole section around DE&I questions. So if you don't use culture, something else like for employee engagement surveys. And basically we set goals that we should be always above, I think 85% on the question of, can I be my full self at work? I think we have 5 questions. Does my manager, and we keep managers accountable because we see their own score. So be like, do my manager care about fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace? Do the leaders at the company? So we really do for each level. And then that way we can have hard conversation if we need to with the people that it's about. The same way we evaluate manager for their skills and how engaged their employees are. To me, that's at the same level of importance as do they feel included and validated in the same way. So I think you can set KPIs on this employee engagement survey for specific DE&I questions. That's pretty straightforward. And again, a measure of inclusion to me is also attrition, assuming you have the data around different groups, you can start seeing, are the women at the company leaving at a faster rate than the men? Like, this is data, because if that's the case, you can start seeing like, okay, why backtrack? Like, do we probably have a problem? Like, what is it? So that would be my two starting point, just, and then reporting publicly. That's something I feel really strongly about. Like, we send a yearly report on salary increase, promotion, and attrition based on gender to the whole company, because it keeps you accountable. We have to show it. And also people when they're like, how do I know if it's fair or not fair? Like, you can just look at the data.
Amazing. So unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. We're a little bit over actually, but just to wrap up, do any of you have any last, I guess, lingering thoughts to leave with the audience? Any, I guess, tips or advice, one final thought that you leave to the audience who are, struggling or trying to bring more D&I into their company? Lawrence, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I mean, from my side, I think it's just really looking into it. And if you're not in a position where you are where you want to be, the first step is, making a start. Everyone says the first step is knowing it or acknowledging it, but it isn't. The first step is doing something about it. And I think people always say that you have to just think about it, but the activity is so important, and you need to start looking into it. And I think for so many companies, the first place to start is going to be auditing where they're at. And I think once you start that, that's where you can go from.
Amazing. And Ursula, any final thoughts to leave with the attendees?
Sure. I was just thinking, just model the behavior and the character that you want to see at work. That goes a very long way. Especially if you're in a leadership role, if people see you asking questions of someone who might be quiet and timid and not the person speaking up, if they see you doing that frequently, if they see you involving people in decision making, they'll be likely, hopefully, to take that example and use it in the areas that they can influence. So that's what I would say.
That I think lead by example, which is fantastic. Thank you. And Zach, what about you?
What Ursula said, that was pretty good. I don't think I can top that. That's good.
Okay, perfect. And Adriele?
I would say before you dive into any of this, education is so important, making sure that everyone has shared language and understanding, even if just the basics. What do we mean when we say diversity? What do we mean when we say inclusion within our organization? Because that way you can then start to foster safe spaces. You can actually audit things. You can create programming, but that education piece is so important.
Amazing. And finally, Anna?
I would say that just like tech debt, diversity debt is a real thing. And so get started today. Don't procrastinate. Better to get started today before it gets to a worse place. So that would be my advice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much to our panel for sharing all of your experiences and ideas and strategies. I think that's all been really helpful to everyone. And thank you all for joining us for our webinar today. I'm just going to leave our link to our LinkedIn group too in the chat, just in case you wanted more information or more content on our future events. And yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for coming.